don't know you. Again, like I told you, I found you on social media. I started watching all your videos about the strength and conditioning. I really enjoy the fact that you focus a lot in goalkeeping. So why don't you talk to us a little bit about you, tell us about your background, and just give us like a small introduction about who you are, where are you located, and all the things.
All right, so we're gonna try to keep this short and concise because this can be a pretty long story.
Hmm.
So my full name is Chris Cole. People know me by Coach Chris. If anything, I may change that to become my official name. It's a title that I hold near and dear to my heart. I played sports my entire life. I was playing. My first sport I ever played was American football. I was the age
Hmm.
of 7, and ever since that point, I've always been super active, either in just training in general, as a kid, being outside, having fun, fooling around with stuff, with my brothers, and just with friends, and then getting into more competition as far as sports goes. So I played basketball, I played a little bit of soccer for all of our European friends, football, not American football. I played a little bit of goalkeeper, but for fun. That's something that we'll get into a little bit more as far as why goalkeepers. We'll talk about that later. But essentially, I've always been active my entire life. As far as my introduction to the field of strength conditioning, it was actually at the end of my American football career, where I was around 18 years old. I live in Canada. I live in Montreal. And at the time where I was playing and when I was in high school, football, American football wasn't as well, it was popular here, but it wasn't as popular as it is now. And getting opportunities to play at the higher level, I'd have to move. So I was
Hmm.
looking at different avenues and options as far as how can I potentially make this something that I do for a career. And I kind of started thinking about that a little bit late in my athletic career. But like they say, it's never too late. I tried, and I ended up doing a few camps in Windsor, Ontario, which is roughly 8 hours from where I live. And I also had some opportunities to do a couple of camps in the U.S., which is essentially where most Canadians want to play because everybody knows about the NFL. Well,
Hmm.
that's all in the U.S. So if you want to get an opportunity to go and play there, you're gonna have to play some U.S. football. And I got some opportunities to play there. I was pretty surprised at the level of competition and how little prepared I was, and how a lot of the stuff that they were doing I'd never been introduced to. I never touched a weight before turning 18 years old. I was never introduced to the gym, to strength and conditioning. I was just going off of pure skill and experience, which got me pretty far. And the fact that I played other sports also helped because of all the movements and the physical literacy that I was able to develop playing other sports, and I was able to transfer it to football to a degree. So it got me pretty far. But I pretty much found myself in a similar situation that most athletes or ex-athletes find themselves in. Is I got hurt, and I had to decide whether or not to keep pursuing this or to follow any medical intervention that was suggested, which in my case was surgery.
Hmm.
And at like 17, 18, my mom's like, no, there's no way. Like this is something that you need to really consider long and hard and think, if you do this and it doesn't go well, you can be messed up for life. So I stopped, but that was when I was first introduced again to all of these like things that were going on behind the scenes as far as like the development of an athlete goes. And that's when I first hit the gym and I got
Yeah.
exposed to weightlifting and stuff like that. And I won't lie, I wasn't training uh, in the same manner that I am now than I was when I was first introduced to training. I got into like the bodybuilder stuff. I just
Hmm.
wanted to do it more for aesthetics and for the physical development, not so much about athleticism in general. But then I got introduced to strength and conditioning. And that's when I started to consider doing this as a job. And my first job, I did not train athletes for the first 3 years. I was a personal trainer. So I worked with, people who were as young as 12 years old who had no interest in sports, just wanted to train because mom and dad are paying for them to train,
Hmm.
all the way up until like 65-year-old individuals who are just trying to stay alive and not break a hip. So, I mean, talk about like it's a completely different world, but at the same time, I'm super grateful for that opportunity because it exposed me to what it was like to train humans.
Hmm.
And you'll see in my philosophy later on that I don't look at goalkeepers as goalkeepers first. They're human beings first, then they fall into the athlete category, and then they're the specialist, hence the goalkeeper. And if you look at it from that perspective, I find it a lot easier to provide them with what they need and thus reaping the fruits of that training because you remember what they are at the foundation. If you only look at them as a goalkeeper, you forget that there are a lot of buckets that specific title does not fill. It doesn't represent the full picture.
Hmm.
So My early career as like primarily a personal trainer really did help me when I started to get into actual strength conditioning. I've been in this field for about close to 11 years now, which is actually quite young to compared to a lot of the other guys in the field. A lot of the guys I respect that I look up to and I call as mentors, but mentors from a distance because they don't know who I am. And yeah, it's I say 3 years in is when I started training athletes, and I started working primarily with hockey players just because in Canada hockey's huge. I
Mm-hmm.
worked as well with some American football guys because in the local area I was still known from my career as an athlete, and I kept some communication, some relationships with some of the guys that I was playing with when I was younger who ended up becoming coaches. So I had my hands full with that, and it was funny. My first exposure to a goalkeeper was maybe 5 years into my career, so it was actually quite late.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I was introduced to like the role of goalkeepers and how deep that hole really goes. It was a world that I was only familiar with from the outside, so I had my own ideas of what it was really like. And damn, there was so much more underneath
Yeah,
the
behind it.
surface. So, but yeah, that's essentially how I kind of got to where I am now as far as my strength conditioning journey. And yeah, it's just kind of full circle. And I've been exposed to so many different things that I feel comfortable with pretty much anyone that comes to me who needs help.
That's good. That's great. And then you mentioned different things that are really interesting. Like, for example, the first one was how you never went to a gym or never lift a weight before being 18. That's right.
Yep.
So I think that's kind of, or at least in the past, I don't know if nowadays there's still like a myth of like, oh, you're not gonna grow if you're like lifting weights, or you shouldn't be lifting weights if you're young. What do you think about that? Like, what are the biggest myths about like weightlifting and an athlete, or combining weightlifting with sports?
So I think the first thing is we have to make sure we define our terms. So when people think weightlifting, they always, for the most part, think of like heavy exercises, like a back squat with a barbell on your back, um, heavy bench press, or anything that involves like excessive amounts of weight. And when I use the word weightlifting, if anything, I use words like resistance training to make it a bit more general.
Mm-hmm.
So they're not, automatically thinking it's a super heavy exercise that you're doing. Resistance training is good. If anything, it's super helpful in the developmental process. It's just understanding what is the most appropriate form of resistance training. So people
Mm-hmm.
kind of tend to overlook this, but your body weight is a resistance. Gravity is a resistance. And you can just start by using your body weight and manipulating gravity to make exercises harder or easier. And that in and of itself is a form of resistance training. So, when you're talking about younger kids, the number one thing that I'd like from a coach's perspective is you have to make use of what you have. Hence, being able, or for the most part, that means body weight, is learning how to manipulate your body in space in different ways, learning how to manage your body weight, just doing a simple push-up or holding yourself in a push-up position. Like you would think that that's something that most kids can do. No, I got adults who can barely crawl. That's pretty
Yeah.
embarrassing. Now I know we don't crawl for the most part. We're usually walking or sitting, but at the same time, if you can't hold yourself up for a minute without like going into this giant spasm,
Mm-hmm.
that's telling me that you missed something, man, in your earlier stages of life. You should be able to own your weight and master your body in various ways before we start looking into adding external resistance and things like that.
Definitely. Again, like same, like me researching or doing different studies, there are different people or different coaches as goalkeepers specifically that they mention like how goalkeepers should just be like working out with their body and being, like you said, like being able of actually domain their body first before adding any other systems or stuff like that. But again, we will try to go that into
Yeah,
deeper a little bit later. I know this topic is really interesting. Like I told you, you can
I know.
talk a lot about that. Like you can talk about nutrition and all that, and hopefully we can search that. But before we go to all those specifics, I just wanted to mention or ask two things because I think it was really nice what you mentioned about like you see the people first before being like goalkeeper, before being an athlete. And I
Yeah,
really appreciate that. And also something that I really appreciate and I really like from your webpage was you promoting your religion and Christianity. I think some people won't care that much about it, but I believe it's great and that you follow this. I just wanted to acknowledge you for doing that. I
thank
think
you.
more people need to step up and do the same and
Yeah, of
live
course.
through those models. So that's great.
Well, it makes me who I am. It's this idea that the faith isn't what I do, it's who I am. It's a transformation, it's a relationship, it's a community. And if you take these things seriously, it changes who you are. You look at life differently, your perspective changes, and the way you approach people changes. And it's really hard sometimes to, especially in the beginning. I remember one of the best pieces of advice that I was ever given before I started working as a personal trainer was, don't look at your clients as dollar signs.
Mm-hmm.
And I still remember that to this day, because I find myself from time to time is, you always think of it from, okay, what can I gain financially from the situation? And if the person that you're speaking with isn't financially ready, able, or willing to invest, sometimes you kind of treat them differently. It's like, no, they're still a
Yeah.
person. There's still someone there that was created, at least from a Christian perspective, is in the image and likeness of God. And you ought to treat them that way. You ought to treat them as if they were Christ standing in front of you. And my faith, when I started taking it seriously, which I only really started looking into this stuff seriously when I was about 21. And I'm the kind of person that it's all or nothing. Either I won't pay any attention to it
Mm-hmm.
and I'll completely disregard it as if it doesn't exist, or I'm going all in. And for something like that, were the promises made for those who are faithful versus those who decide to put themselves first and enjoy this life to the fullest and not really consider the next. I'm not willing to deal with those consequences. I don't want to be, faced at the end of my life and say, you could have done this. Why didn't you choose that? You could have helped this person. Why didn't you? No, I can't have that on my conscience. So
Yeah.
it's something that I take serious, something that changes me, that changed me, and that continues to change me. And I find that it helps me do my job better, because I can see um, things from a better point of view, like from the full picture. And then it helps me approach, my situations appropriately, and also with the difficult times that you'll find yourself in inevitably, no matter who you are or what you do.
So I'm definitely like the need to serve other people. I think that's part of it. Again, I did enjoy a lot what you mentioned about you don't see people as a money sign or something like that at the end. And to be honest, like we don't earn that much, like money wise, but we do it
Yeah.
because we're really passionate about this and we want to build these people. We want
Yeah.
to build the person, and if we can do that, will be amazing.
Yeah.
But anyway,
Of
so
course.
moving a little bit. So you mentioned, okay, hockey is big, goalkeeping is big, and then you start working with after 5 years with a goalkeeper specific. So tell us about or why nowadays like you decide to promote more the goalkeeping aspects besides like the general strength and conditioning or like different sports.
So I'm gonna be completely honest. I was almost forced to. It wasn't something that
Mm-hmm.
I went and looked out, or I went to search for. It was kind of brought to me, and I had to make the most of my situation. I was really early in my strength and conditioning career, so when I started focusing more on training athletes, it meant putting less emphasis on just training the average person. I still have clients that I work with who are not athletes, or at least are not playing a competitive sport, but they don't make as much of my business anymore. So because of that decision, I was, having to take clients that I may not have necessarily have worked with before, or athletes from sports that I've never really trained or worked in for very long. And I found myself with a goalkeeper once, and I've always appreciated the position, even though I didn't really know much about it, or I hadn't worked with a lot of keepers personally. I liked the idea of the high pressure position. For me as an athlete, I usually did my best work when all the pressure was on me. I played team sports. I know goalkeepers they play a team sport, but it's weird, man. It's such an odd position because they're a part of the team, but they're separated from the team at the same time,
Yeah.
because they're playing in their own zone where everybody else is kind of down there. So it's the irony, yet the complementarity of the position. It's something that I was always drawn to. I was like, this is interesting. This is different. And I always like different. I'm not like, I don't follow the flow very well.
Mm-hmm.
So the whole high pressure situation or position I really felt drawn to. And then when I started working with goalkeepers, it was fun. I had one, and then next thing you know, I had another one, even though I wasn't trying to get more goalkeepers. And the more conversations I was having with the guys that I was working with, and the girls as well, I started realizing there was a massive disconnect between, the things that they wanted out of their training and how they were actually training for it. There's a huge misunderstanding from the physiological standpoint as well as kinematics. So how goalkeepers move. This doesn't necessarily involve or doesn't necessarily imply that technique is what we're referring to. There are movements that will allow you to perform certain technical actions better. But the technique comes after. If you don't have the basic movement skill or the mechanics involved in that technique execution, then the technique's going to look different, or the technique of choice may not work for this player because they don't have the base foundation of just general movement. And that's something that I was very familiar with because of playing other sports, that there are similarities as far as how some athletes move, and there are some differences in how they perform certain those movements. For example, the shuffle. You can shuffle in different ways. But
Yeah,
all of my goalkeepers only knew how to shuffle one way. I'm like, that's not ideal, because what happens if you find yourself in a situation where that shuffle pattern or that shuffle mechanic doesn't work and you
yeah,
only know how to shuffle that way? What do? It's like you're not prepared. You're prepared for one situation. So there was that massive misunderstanding and disconnect. And then the last thing that really kind of drew me to goalkeepers was how they're ostracized and underappreciated.
hmm,
I'm the kind of person that I look out for the little guy. Uh, Unfortunately, I wasn't the nicest guy in high school. It's kind of a jerk. Like typical jock. Yeah.
yeah,
Uh, I regret that. If I could go back and do things differently, I would. But it
hmm,
taught me a lot. Funny enough, my eldest brother actually has a disability, and because of that, it's taught me patience and like to look at people, um, as like there's an individual there, and if they can't do things to the same level that I can, like think of why, and maybe they're in difficult situations where they can't help themselves. And because of that, I've always felt there's like this sense of like being protective of my older brother, even though I'm younger than him, but he's maybe
yeah,
not intellectually able to take care of himself. And the same thing for goalkeepers. I kind of saw that. I'm like, it's almost like everybody else was bullying them, yet you didn't even know who you were bullying. You just misunderstood them. And I kind of felt I almost went on the defensive, saying, guys, like, leave them alone. Like, you don't know
hmm,
this person's story. You don't know this person's situation. You don't know why they do what they do. And I guess it's funny, the older brother mentality came out, even though I'm a younger brother, but I have younger
yeah,
siblings too. And I think that's more of like a personal attraction that I had to position, is like, I felt like they were so misunderstood, similar to how my brother was when I was younger. And
hmm,
I wanted to come to their defense, even though I'm not going to defend anybody. I don't have that authority, but to give them the benefit of the doubt and speak up for them who are afraid to speak up for themselves, as far as like the demands of the position, and remembering that you know they've got a lot on their shoulders, and you have to be compassionate and understanding that it's hard to be a keeper. So remember that before you start criticizing them.
no, for sure. I mean, I really love what you said there because, of course, goalkeeping is just like a position. Sometimes really lonely, it's a really lonely
Yeah,
position. People don't realize everything that you deal with. Like the goalkeeper position is really mentally as well, as we can see. Like
yeah,
getting a score, being blamed, and all this stuff. Like it's not easy. And people, it's easy for somebody just to turn and say like you could have done better, but
yeah,
they don't understand what could have happened. All these like you're showing up, you're doing this, you're dealing with this. So it's kind of a messed up position.
yeah, yeah,
That's great. And I mean, at least like I told you, it's kind of nice that now people are being more aware about goalkeeping, and they're promoting more like goalkeeper coaches. Because before, during my whole career, I mean, during my whole college career, I had goalkeeper training like 3 times, 5 times. It wasn't like a big thing. I didn't have a goalkeeper coach or stuff like that, so it was kind of a bad situation. So it's good that it's growing.
yeah,
I
definitely.
wanted to follow up with some stuff. So definitely, I think, like you mentioned, you won't be able to perform that technique if you're not coordinated. And I really believe in that coordination as a goalkeeper, being able to move around, do these different aspects before actually going specifically to a goalkeeping part. Like you
Yeah,
cannot ask a person to dive and do all this. They cannot even coordinate how to shuffle in different ways, like you mentioned, how to
yeah.
take that step and doing all those things. So my two questions for right now, I think the first one, I think will be the shortest one, will be regarding like you mentioned some mistakes. So what was like those mistakes that goalkeepers used to have, or the myths, or all that that you saw at the beginning? You were like, Jesus, we need to change that.
So the first one was just an understanding of stress. Um, and what I mean by that is that a lot of the athletes didn't realize that what they were doing on the pitch, um, the body doesn't really care what form stress comes in, it responds to it the same way. And if you
Mhm.
don't understand that no matter where you are, if you apply stress to your body, it's going to respond, it's going to use the stress response. And a lot of the times, goalkeepers would train a certain way on the pitch and not realize the impacts that that has on their physical abilities. And then they try and train, but their body really isn't in a state where they can perform at their best because they overloaded themselves on the pitch. And this is something that's really more geared towards coaches. And it's something that I'm trying to start being a bit more vocal about is coaches have to have not a large, you know, knowledge or foundation of understanding of physiology. It's just you have to appreciate that what you're doing on the pitch, it has an impact on their physical abilities. So if you want a goalkeeper to get explosive, there's a reason why playing your sport more won't necessarily improve the areas that you're deficient in. I'll give you an example. The goalkeeper position doesn't really involve speed training. Yet I'm sure every athlete wants to be faster, keepers included. Getting from one end of the post or from going from one post to the opposite one as fast as possible. Super important. That's speed. But
Mhm.
it's very rare that there's actual speed training in an on-pitch session. Well, if you wanted to get faster, doing the sport that isn't addressing that bucket isn't going to get you faster. So you have to supplement the speed work with what you're doing on the pitch if your goal is to get faster. And that's one of the things that I saw was lacking is you want this, but you're not training for that. And it's one of the reasons why they never really realized their full potentials because they weren't training for the thing that they wanted to get better at.
Mhm.
So there was that disconnect between what you're doing on the pitch, how it influences your physical abilities, and then understanding that you have to be able to supplement the things that you're not getting in your actual goalkeeper training sessions with training that will help improve the areas that your specific work will not. Because if goalkeeper training was all you needed to become more explosive, faster, all this stuff, I wouldn't exist. My job would not be necessary. All of it will be taken care of on the pitch. That's not
Mhm.
the case. That's not the case for pretty much any sport because the sport only does so much. It doesn't check off every box. And if the box that you need to check off is not checked off by your sport isn't the solution. It's something outside of your sport. And that's something that both goalkeeper coaches and athletes weren't really thinking of. Like, oh, maybe I have to do something that's not related to my sport to get better at the thing that I need to in order to be better at my sport. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, definitely. Like you said, you need to su supplement. I forgot the
That
word that
that
you
works.
used. Yeah, there you
I
go.
forget all the time.
Supplement. That definitely. So regarding that, like, when do you think like goalkeepers should like start practicing like, resistance training and stuff like that? Like, at what age and how these different stages of different ages should look like?
So
How do
there's
you?
a
How do you?
there's a model. It's called long-term athletic development. It's also known as LTAD or LTAD. And it's not, the end all be all. I think it's something that's still being researched and still being fine-tuned, but it's a good, I guess, base to start from. And coaches will manipulate a little bit. But the idea is, or the premise is at different ages, athletes, human beings will benefit from certain types of training a bit more. It's not that they shouldn't do other types of training. Some of them they shouldn't as far as developmental reasons, but that they'll respond better to certain types of training. So, for example, I'm going off the top of my head here. Depending on whether it's a boy or a girl, because they hit puberty a little bit sooner. When you're young, it's more about having fun, and people tend to forget the importance of just having fun, like enjoying physical activity, fitness, and because it doesn't look structured, people think that it's not helping. That's not true because a lot of times sports is unstructured, it's chaotic. Yet there are a lot of things happening that, well, they're pretty high stresses. There's a lot of development happening, that we can't really see or quantify, but it's good, even if it's not structured, you know. Um, Same thing for young kids, like, just being able to crawl. There's stuff that we work on with younger athletes is just again dealing with your body weight, learning how to crawl, learning how to climb, learning how to throw, running around playing games. And people think games, oh, it's pointless. No, that's what sport is. You're running around. You're like, play tag. You play tag for
Mm-hmm.
real, it's change of direction everywhere. You're having to react, respond. There's like a bunch of things happening in such a short amount of time. You have to be able to make decisions really quick. You got to multitask sometimes. There's speed, elements of speed, acceleration, deceleration. Those are all physical qualities that you can develop. It's just that because it's being delivered in a fun manner that people think, oh, it's not good anymore. Oh, it's
Mm-hmm.
all the same things are happening. It's just not happening in a structured manner. It's real. It's live. It's chaotic. So when you're younger, you want to expose them to different things. You want them to experience movement in different ways. Skip, gallop, coordination. I've got athletes who barely know how to skip, and I'm not
Mm-hmm.
talking about like skipping with a skipping rope. I mean like skipping patterns, moving forward, moving backwards, moving sideways. I'm like, this is disappointing because this is just another example of not being able to own or master what you have and to coordinate different patterns, different sequences. This is where, like dancers, tons of rhythm. I would guarantee that if a goalkeeper knew how to dance, they would be much smoother with certain movements on the pitch. It's not because they're dancing, it's because of what dancing provides that the position doesn't. There's a rhythm to it. There's that relaxation. There are certain goalkeepers who, like, for me, it's Newer. He is so smooth and
Mm-hmm.
relaxed with his movement. Some people don't like it. They're like, "Oh, you're not stiff enough." It's like, yeah, but that's why he's so good, because he's not overly stiff, because
Yeah.
he's very comfortable with his body in space, and those things are really developed well at a younger age, and they are made use of when you get older. It's hard to develop that coordination when you're older. As you get older and you get closer to puberty, this is where you start introducing things like speed training. If I'm not mistaken, there are 2 speed windows in the LTAD model. And there's I think it's between the ages of 9 and 10 for boys. I'm not too familiar with the girls. And then afterwards, again, a second time between the ages of 12 and 14 for boys. And usually girls, it's plus or minus 1 year. And this is where the speed training will probably have a greater impact and will definitely show up when they get older. They'll benefit a lot more from speed training when they're older if they had done a little bit younger. And I don't mean speed training as in like they have to have this like harness or parachute behind them. It's like just run fast, run up a hill, run down a hill, chase your friends. Like that's speed training. Again, it's just
Yeah.
not organized. And yeah, like those ages really benefit from that kind of training. And that essentially is athletic training. It's train like an athlete, throw things that are heavy, throw things fast, run fast, run at different speeds, change directions. Those are all things that goalkeepers need to start doing at a young age, because those ages is where these habits are developed. This foundation is created so that when they get older, a lot of the coordinative stuff behind the position takes no time to learn because they had already done a various amount of coordinative exercises and activities when they're younger. It's really easy to get somebody strong. It's really easy to get somebody powerful. Coordination, rhythm, fluidity, that's a whole different animal. That's hard to teach.
Yeah. No, that's good. That's good. Definitely, I agree with the crossover of the stuff. Even like in my case, like for example, me, you will say I'm crazy a little bit, but for example, I practice jiu-jitsu as a martial art,
Oh,
and
sweet.
it's a lot. Yeah, it's a lot about like stretching and also kickboxing with kicks and all that. And honestly, I have seen like the progression of like how this can still even translate to goalkeeping, and it's kind of interesting. Like if you find like a really good goalkeeper or something like that, you can put a that goalkeeper to play any sport, and they will most likely be really coordinated. I
Yep.
don't know if you have seen like a basketball player sometimes come in and play soccer, like they don't have that big of coordination with the feet or stuff like that. It's kind of curious
I
how like
have
the
one.
goalkeeper position, one
There's
what.
there's one goalkeeper. I won't name names, and if he's listening
Mm-hmm.
to this podcast, he may know that I'm talking about him.
Uh-huh.
Uh, of all the athletes that I have worked with in all the various sports, he was and still is the fastest. He jumps the highest, and as far as relative strength goes, so strength to body weight, in most of the lower body movements, some of the upper body ones as well, he is number one.
Mm-hmm.
He's a goalkeeper.
He's a
He's
goalkeeper.
quite short for a keeper, And I was talking to some of his coaches before I had officially started to train him, and they were pointing him out. I'm like, oh, who's this guy? Because he stood out.
Hmm.
And they're like, yeah, he excels in everything, but because of his height, he's overlooked. I'm like, that's just ridiculous. He can do
Yeah.
all of the things. He can get the job done, but because he
Mhm.
doesn't look the part, that he's overlooked. I'm like, well, isn't the end of like the goal at the end of the day is that the ball doesn't go in the back of the net? Well, if the
Yeah.
guy who's shorter than the guy who's taller is more athletic and has more of a chance of making more saves than the guy who's taller, I want the guy who's going to make the saves. I don't care what he looks like. And yeah, just it. And I asked him, this person, like, do you play any other sports? 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 sports. I'm like,
No,
that explains a lot.
yeah, for sure. Again, like you can go to volleyball, you can go to basketball, you can just translate. I think it's a really complete position as an athlete in
Yeah,
general.
absolutely.
Something that you also mentioned, like yeah, training as an athlete. I think like me during my career, I never really knew that, and I think like the information wasn't the best during
Mhm.
those periods. So my workouts will just consist on, like you mentioned, bodybuilding basically. So bench press, bicep curls, and all the things, shoulder press, and just doing certain exercise. I never jump like outside of practice, or I never like sprint outside of practice. It was just stick to weightlifting, 6 reps and
Yeah.
resting, and then do it 3 times or whatever, putting as much weight as I wanted. So I think that also kind of didn't help me as well as a goalkeeper. I should have learned more about the topic. So how do you think like a workout for a goalkeeper should look like?
So the first thing is when it comes to training is everything works. It's just it comes down to dosage. Is how much of each of these different styles of training or these different methods of training do you need to dose your athletes with in order for them to see the improvements that they want to see? So, bodybuilding gets a bad rep, but there are things that bodybuilder training is really good at. If I have a really, really undersized goalkeeper who could benefit from putting on a little bit of weight, you can bet your rear end that I'm going to start using some bodybuilder approaches. They're not
Mm-hmm.
going to train to be a bodybuilder. We're going to use some methods from the bodybuilding world to try and increase some muscle mass because, well, they're really good at it. It's the same thing for, let's say, a goalkeeper who's really slow. Well, I'm going to look at the fastest people in the world, look at how they train, and say, what can I take from this that will help my goalkeeper get faster in general? There's obviously a point where you have to make it a bit more specific, and there's like kind of debate between like, does that even really change anything? Does the strength coach even have the capacity to do that? I won't get into that, but the idea is, there are general things that athletes are required to have in order to have a better chance at performing at the sport better. It doesn't make them a better athlete. It just makes certain things easier to do because they have the physical outputs to be able to get those things done, especially if you're coordinated. But as far as a goalkeeper, it's understanding what they need more of, what they need enough of, and what they need very little of, and
Mm-hmm.
balancing those things. It can be difficult. This is where just understanding different avenues of training is really important. But as far as what the average goalkeeper needs, like generally speaking, from my point of view, like my philosophy is first thing is you have to look at training age versus training experience. There are a
Mm-hmm.
lot of guys who are playing at the high like professional level who have a very low training age. Now they're experienced, they've been playing the sport for a long time, but the exposure that they've had to structured like strength training, speed training is very little. So technically they're beginners in that area. So you would
Mm-hmm.
approach them from a beginner standpoint, which looks a lot like just training like an athlete. The weightlifting is there to complement because weightlifting provides certain things that other types of training doesn't. For example, it's very good for like tendon health, so connective tissue. Weightlifting, you can't beat it. It's
Mm-hmm.
actually one of the things that you use for rehab and like therapeutic measures. You've got to load that sucker. Well, weightlifting provides that load that other types of activities don't for those kind of tissues. There's the question of strength or force. Well, you've got two ways essentially to improve your strength or your force. You can either add more mass or you can accelerate that mass faster. Well,
Mm-hmm.
you can kind of manipulate the mass really well with resistance training, heavy loads. It's just how much of that do you need to move the needle in the direction or the athlete needs. So if I've got an athlete who's really underdeveloped, they're quite athletic, pretty coordinated, but they don't have that pop, I'm probably going to go after strength training because
Yeah.
they've got the things, the foundations that I'd like them to have. I'll keep training them that way, but I will focus on strength because it's the one thing I'm pretty sure is going to move the needle more.
Mhm.
And once that needle, we've kind of exhausted that, then we'll just maybe put strength on the background. Not that we take it out completely. We don't make it the priority. And we focus on just, I would say, kind of putting the cherry on top. It's just fine tuning the things that they're really good at. And there's a coach, his name is Hunter Eisenhower. Shout out to Coach Eisenhower. He uses the term superpower versus kryptonite. Essentially, it's taking the qualities that the goalkeepers are really good at, so they're superpowers, and balancing that with the kryptonite, so what they're not so good at. Because you have an athlete, let's say, who's built a certain way. Well, certain types of training are going to lead to better improvements because of their structure, their build, what they're really good at doing. Where other types of training don't necessarily help move the needle as much. So trying to balance, the training that will move the needle, like the training that they need at that time, versus the training that may not move the needle as much, but is still important. So you
Mhm.
have like health and performance. Well, health goals, there's longevity, but training for health doesn't necessarily mean you're going to improve physically. And then there's training for performance. Well, doing too much of that may put you at risk of experiencing health problems. So injury rates may go up because you're focusing too much on performance. Like you're wearing out your engine, but you're not putting good oil back in. You're not, uh, fine tuning the brakes or whatever car analogy you want to use.
Mhm.
So it's just understanding the balance of different types of training and how much of each does a goalkeeper need given where they are physically and in their career as well. Because when you're really really you're getting paid a lot of money at a high level, I don't know if adding an extra 25 pounds to the squat is ideal if it puts them at greater risk of getting hurt, and that means they can't play, and
Mhm.
therefore the team's like, I'm paying you a lot of money, yet you can't play because you're injured because you tried to get your squat up. Not saying that squatting is
Yeah.
bad, not saying getting stronger is bad. It's just you've got to weigh out the pros and cons. Like, okay, maybe just keeping this guy healthy for the next 5 years is more important than getting his vertical up by 3 inches.
Yeah. Okay.
So yeah, that's
It's
kind of where I
funny.
go.
It's funny how you mentioned like even professional players that are still like naive with the topic or stuff like that. Because a couple of weeks ago, I remember Mexico like posting a video on Instagram about they bragging that they were working out and all that. Like the national team of Mexico with the Copa America, they post a video bragging about them. Everybody started laughing because their technique was awful. It was so bad. So it was like, why are you posting this? Even though like you're a professional player, doesn't mean like you're the one that knows every single thing about it. It's kind of curious. But
Yeah.
now let me ask you, Chris, what are your thoughts regarding like bringing the strength and conditioning to the field as a practice part? Like I know I have seen some videos of like people doing or bringing like the weights and then doing a circuit and stuff like that, and then actually going to practice. What are your thoughts about that? Do you believe like we should, whenever you're in the field, you should focus on the field thing, or whenever you are like in practice, then we should add both stuff, like for example, plyometrics and then doing like goalkeeper drills, or what are your thoughts about that? If they should be separate or
So this is going to depend because I'm going to come at this from the point of view of like a performance coach. So, trying to improve physical outputs like, power, speed, strength, as well as I don't know what the term I should use to, you know, explain what I do as far as movement goes, but like developing good movement habits and just general movement skills. What I like, there's a coach, I believe the coach's name is Dan John. He was saying, it's a famous quote that he's always, been known for is keep the main thing the main thing. And
Mhm.
essentially what that means is when you're on the pitch and you're working on your goalkeeper stuff, focus on that. Don't try and bring something else that could disrupt what you're doing because it may actually be taking away from what you're supposed to be training. Versus, and the same thing applies to the gym is your gym training session should look nothing like what you do on the pitch because that's not why you're there. The gym is
Mhm.
not there to blend or blend. It's not there to be identical to what you do on the pitch. It's the thing that you do that fills the buckets that the things on the pitch don't fill. And it's not to say that like bringing your stuff onto the pitch is a bad idea. It's just that I would not try and blend the two worlds at the same time. For example, doing a sports specific exercise in the gym that doesn't exist. Sports specific exercises are the sport. Gym training it's all general. It's general training. But that's not a bad thing because there are things that the specifics training that you do on the pitch, they don't address those general qualities that allow you to do certain things. Like, whether people like it or not, every action that a goalkeeper performs has a physical component to it. There's kinematics, there's movement, variety, there are kinetics. You're dealing with forces, physics, gravity. Like all of these things are happening. And yes, technique is important. I would say tactical awareness is even more important because if you're in the right place at the right time, you can be a little bit more relaxed with your technique because you're where you're supposed to be. But all of those actions involve something physiological, force, speed, power, strength, whatever. So if you blending the two worlds at the same time does not allow you to train, let's say, force at its highest capacity, then you won't improve force because you're making the drill too complicated to overload the demands as far as force go. So if you got an athlete who is force deficient, so they're weak, I'm not going to have them do a goalkeeper drill with a weighted vest because it adds weight. Therefore, it's more strength. No, because that may not be enough weight. That may not be enough force because you're making it, you're kind of mudding the water by trying to combine them. It's like you want to get them strong, do the thing that will get them the strongest.
Yeah.
And if you want to get them more technically sound, work on the technique. Blending the two just creates this really weird end result that doesn't lead to any improvement either in the physiological department or the technical department. So, I don't want to hate on coaches. This is the one thing I won't do on social media is I won't call anybody out. I don't mind being called out, especially if it's, there's a good reason for it. When someone just says things and has no defense for what they're saying, I'm like, all right, I got time for you.
Yeah.
I'm open to communication. I don't mind being, disagreed with. That's fine. If anything, it makes me a better coach. But there are certain things that I see, I'm scratching my head. I'm like, what is the point of this? And there could be a really good reason for why they're doing it. I just can't see it. When I'm seeing like 15 hurdles and diving, if the goal is to get better at diving and you want to make it very specific, just dive. Just dive. Because in real life, they're not diving over hurdles. They're having to move around people that move. The hurdles don't move. So it changes how you actually execute the movement. And if anything, it's less specific at that point because you're using objects that force you to change your approach and how you deal with your environment. And if you want to make it specific, get it to as close as the actual thing as you can, because then you'll improve that. And the same thing goes for strength. If the issue that the goalkeeper is having is related to a physical output, do not combine it with things that are not going to improve the physical output or that are going to make it less effective. Doing a squat on a Bosu ball, inherently not going to make you stronger because the Bosu ball is unstable. And if you're unstable, you can't produce as much force. And if you're not producing enough force, you're not getting stronger.
Yeah.
That's it.
No, definitely. For sure, like that part that you mentioned about like really focusing on one thing, that's priority for sure. Something else that you have been mentioning a lot is about like being aware about like those loads, about overload. And you just brought it up, like being stable and all those things. So for sure, strength and conditioning is not just about like running, it's not about just like lifting weights, it's not about all this resistance training, but also like flexibility, agility, nutrition, sleep, recovery, and all those things. So what are your thoughts regarding that in the goalkeeping environment about all of these aspects?
It's a matter of being able to blend all of the things that will allow you to perform at your highest. So you have, people term these things in different ways, but you have like different buckets. You've got the physical bucket. So strength, power, speed, change of direction, agility, your ability to move in different ways and express these outputs in a more specific manner. Then you have, the mental, the psychological, like, hey, dealing with the stresses of sport, of being an athlete, of being a goalkeeper. So being able to have good strategies and how to incorporate that into your overall athletic development. Then you have recovery measures. So sleep, nutrition, all of these things work together. And, as coaches, sometimes we get very narrow minded. We just focus on one thing. We forget that it all has to be blended together. And this is where you have different specialists. Like you have, most teams have a nutritionist, then they have a sports scientist or a sports psychologist, and then you have the strength and conditioning coach. And if those coaches are not on the same page and they're not having conversations on a regular basis about their athletes, the athletes are the ones that suffer in the end because we're not, if we're not speaking the same language, then we don't really know if what we're doing is making it worse or better.
Mm-hmm.
And if the coaches don't talk to each other, then we don't really know where the athletes are at, like, okay, what they're lacking. And this is why I find it so important that, like, for example, you specialize in the goalkeeper specific stuff. I don't. I can learn a lot from you. And the more I understand what you do and what you're looking for in drill, the better I can then train the things that you need in order for the athlete to perform that drill better. So you talk about, going for crosses, cross collection.
Yeah.
I'll give you examples how the physical side will impact both the mental and the technical. If the athlete is not confident that they can jump high enough, I can guarantee you that they're not going to be as aggressive going out for crosses because they don't think they can get up.
Yeah, or grab the ball.
Well, that's it. So the fact that they don't have the physical ability to jump high affected their mentality and affected their technique because they may change how they jump to allow them to make the most of what they have, which isn't really much as far as jump height goes. And that you can also take that same approach and apply it to, okay, nutrition. You're training super, super hard. You're doing 2-a-days, but you eat like a 15-year-old. Your breakfast is cereal, your lunch is cereal, and your dinner is cereal. It's like, how do you expect to perform at the highest level possible if you eat like a kid who's never cooked before and, only has enough money to buy cereal? It's like,
Yeah.
That's not going to help you make the most out of your situation because you're not fueling your body with the things that it needs in order for you to continue to do those 2-a-days, which I don't recommend to do forever.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing with the mental. Let's say you're eating really well and you're physically where you would like to be. Things are going well on the physical side, but you just can't deal with the stress. There's too much in your head. Well, I have a close client of mine. I'm really close with the family, and the son, he plays basketball, and all the coaches that he worked with were saying, you have the physical ability. You don't lack that. But yet it's not showing up in the game. And they realized there's a mental block. But he had everything. He had all the physical qualities needed to be an elite basketball player at his age. But because he wasn't mentally strong enough or there was a mental block, you couldn't see it. Well, you got to address that. And the better we are as coaches at being able to help our athletes in the areas that we can and to have a more holistic approach, the better the athletes are going to improve and the better the results are going to be because we're trying to keep the big picture in mind. We can't, yes, short-term things are important, but short-term things lead to the big picture. And I think if you have the big picture in mind and you work backwards from there, it's going to make it a little bit easier for you to make those adjustments because you always know where you're trying to go.
For sure.
So
No, I agree with you in the fact like we should have all a balance. We should have all and I think that happens a lot. Like coaches doesn't really communicate between each other. So for example, I'm the goalkeeper coach and I'm not really knowing what the heck my goalkeepers are doing in the weight room or stuff like that. And I think that's a huge mistake, as you mentioned, because we need the specific needs. Me, things that I see, what can they be fixed by you? I should be communicating with you on those things, and you should also give me feedback about because also it doesn't make sense, for example, for me to put like a really strong workout in the morning and then in the evening you also put a really strong workout. Now tomorrow a goalkeeper is gonna show up like, what the heck am I doing? I'm really sore or stuff like that. So communication is gonna be essential for sure between coaches. And
Absolutely.
also they meant like you said, all of this is just a huge balance regarding like technique, agility, abilities, mental aspect. Like a goalkeeper, I can, and people will hate me for this, and I'm sorry if I'm offending somebody, but like when goalkeepers show up being overweight, I'm just like, please, like even I understand like sometimes kids doesn't have the responsibility, but you as a parent or stuff like that, you shouldn't be allowing this because even with the mental aspect, not only with the okay, he's gonna get injured, he's gonna get hurt. It's not easy to dive when you're overweight or stuff like that. Just the mental aspect of a goalkeeper looking good will kill a goalkeeper not looking good just because of the fact that they feel comfortable on the body, they
Yeah.
feel comfortable on the game and stuff like that. So those little details, I think, play a really important role. And as you mentioned, there is this miscommunication. Again, is getting better, but like the nutrition wise, again,
Mhm.
I never knew nothing about nutrition until I will just say whatever, until I was later in my career, like my last 2 years, something like that. So I have my question regarding like I know normally, like for example, with the teams, players end up eating the same as the goalkeepers. But there's this saying that, of course, goalkeepers don't run as much as players. They're not burning as much calories. What are your thoughts regarding this? Like, how do you approach nutrition as a goalkeeper?
So the first thing is the goalkeepers are the goalkeeper position is extremely unique in the sense that there is way more work being done in practice compared to the game. When you look at almost every other sport position, it's the opposite. The work being done in the game goes far beyond the work being done in practice. So just because the work that goalkeepers or the amount of work being done overall in a game is lower for a keeper, we have to remember again, big picture. That's a 90-minute window for the entire week. Well,
Mm-hmm.
goalkeepers practice pretty freaking hard. Sometimes too hard. That's a different story. But they work hard. You have to have the necessary fuel to practice like that, to be able to come back day in and day out and perform at your best so that come match day, you're ready to go. Whether or not you're doing a lot of work on match day, the idea is to be ready for match day. And because of that extra work being done in practices, that's even more of a reason to fuel them. And it's like the way you were saying it, it's an example of someone looking at it from a very, very narrow point of view. Look at the big picture. They don't do a lot in a match, therefore they shouldn't eat as much. Yeah, whatever, but they do a lot during the week. It all has to be balanced. It has to be looked at from a objective standpoint. And I think looking at it from a 90-minute window when there's 24 hours in a day times 7 days in a week, that's a super small percentage of time that you're then giving advice
Yeah.
as far as nutrition goes. So they have to eat because they practice very hard. Um, and then it's just general nutrition principles is there's recovery. You know, I'm pretty sure there is a link between eating good food and your mental state. I'm not an expert as far as nutrition goes. I've got a good understanding of that. I've taken some courses on it.
Mm-hmm.
Comfortable enough to give some advice, but definitely not a nutritionist. But there's definitely a link. You know, when you eat bad food, you tend to feel bad.
Yeah, for
There's a
sure.
physiological effect that takes place, or that the food has rather, on you. It's the same thing when you eat well. You're like, oh, I feel good. Like, you know, I'm putting
Right.
good things in my body. Well, you don't think that's going to have an impact on how they perform?
Mm-hmm.
It kind of leads into developing even further good habits. Well, that's like a compounding effect is good habits, good habit, good habit. All right. Now we got ourselves a sustainable good habit. It's just what we do. So it definitely has an impact on the goalkeeper's performance, not only from their ability to practice at a high level, but just to sustain the the work effort, the work level rather, the effort levels, and to hopefully reduce the chances of getting hurt because nutrition will also have an impact on your ability on your chances of getting hurt too. It doesn't seem like it does, but honestly, there's inflammation when you eat certain foods, and well, too much inflammation is not good.
Yeah. All right, Chris. I mean, we're running kind of with
Oh
time,
shoot.
and I want to be mindful about your time. But I have two more questions that I would like to tell you. And of course, like I told you, I think this topic is really you get to talk a lot about it. Like you can be really specific with that and all that. I think we have covered good things. But I have two final questions. So my first one would be preseason is coming, all of this is coming, and I know as field players they normally do the beep test or these different tests for testing players. So do you believe goalkeepers should have like a specific test, or how will you approach that?
1000%. So
Mm-hmm.
there are some things that I think all players should test, just because again they give you a general inside look of the qualities that every athlete needs to have. Like
Mm-hmm.
things like relative strength. There are different ways to do that. You can do it. Force plates are really big now, so testing peak force. Um, how fast or how long it takes you to get to peak force. So rate of force development. There are a lot of things that every athlete will benefit from as far as just a general testing standpoint goes. But as far as specifics for goalkeepers, I don't care how fast they run to be tested, because
Mm-hmm.
their position is not an endurance based one. It's a short, quick, and explosive position that's very alactic. A beep test
Mm-hmm.
is not an, I'm using big words. It's a system that the body does not really rely on very much to perform the tasks required of a goalkeeper. It's not that the system is unimportant. There are benefits to training that system, but it's not going to have the same impact on the goalkeeper's performance and the certain actions that they go through on the pitch, because it's not the predominant system that they use to perform those tasks. So having tests that measure jump distance laterally, because a lot of the movement's lateral. Change direction tests. Change of direction is not the same thing as agility, because there's no reacting, it's already predetermined. But there are things
Mm-hmm.
that I can see, like how do you move from side to side, just generally speaking. If you do that poorly, you're probably not going to do it very well in a reactive context. It gives me an idea of how they move. Like, okay, are they able to shift from left to right, stuff like that. Jump testing, just general jump testing. Speed testing, oh my goodness, something that I don't think they do enough of. I know that
Mm-hmm.
goalkeepers don't do max velocity work. Maybe there's an argument for not doing that far, but there are things that sprinting trains that no other form of training develops. And
Mm-hmm.
those qualities are qualities that goalkeepers would highly benefit from, and would make certain things on the pitch a lot easier to do from a general standpoint. So yeah, speed training, speed tests, change direction tests, especially lateral change of direction test, which is usually what change of direction involves, and just some general strength tests, just to see where they're at as far as relative strength goes, and their force capabilities. But the conditioning stuff I would probably move away from a little bit more, or at least not put so much emphasis on it. Like they can do the beep test, whatever, but don't be upset
Mm-hmm.
if they're the least fit as far as the beep test goes, or the results are not in the top 10. They shouldn't be. I don't want my fastest guy. The fastest guy on your team is not going to be the fittest guy. They're
Yeah,
two opposite worlds. So
interesting, good. I will text you later regarding some different names to see if you can help me with that, so I can probably implement it for my
yeah,
keepers here in the
for sure.
college. It'll be nice. And then final question, Chris. Three advices that you will give to a goalkeeper, like regarding like the strength and conditioning principle, nutrition, or just the position in general. What do you think will those be?
Okay. I wrote these down because I wanted to make sure I didn't give other tips.
I
First is
what? I
have a
what? Sorry, I think it cut a little bit. What did you
oh,
say?
I wrote these down because I didn't want to forget these tips, because I had to think about these. I'm like, all right, I only got three, so I got to be really particular. And
Yeah,
these may
really
change
specific.
down the road, but
Hmm.
the first one is have a short memory. Um, you're gonna make mistakes. It's your position is one where you're already at a disadvantage from the get go. I was talking to some of my goalkeepers a while back, and the one thing that shocked me is that we're talking about penalty kicks, and they were saying like, yeah, we're expected not to make the save. I'm like, I have
Yeah.
never heard of a position where you're expected to fail. It's usually like basketball, you're expected to make the shot, you're
Hmm.
expected to catch the ball. But to hear them say you're expected not to make the save, I'm like, that's messed up. So the fact that
Yeah.
it's almost like they show up ready to fail. And there are going to be a lot of people that are going to be in your ear reminding you, oh, you didn't make the save, you didn't make the save. have a short memory. Understand that you're not perfect. You're playing, your position is extremely demanding. It's very unique. And you have to accept the fact that things are not always going to go your way. There are certain things that you can only prepare so much for something. You may find yourself in a situation like, oh crap, I didn't see that coming. Or things happen too fast. Let it go. Because if you don't know how to let it go, it's going to ruin the rest of your match. And it's going to have an impact on not only your performance on the pitch, but just general personal life. Because you don't know how to let things go. So that's the
Yeah.
first tip.
And a great example of that, you just occurred a couple of days ago. I don't know if you saw it, Portugal with Cristiano Ronaldo.
Yeah.
So here's the thing: they show how Cristiano Ronaldo misses the penalty, how Pepe, like all this Pepe, the center back, he misses, and then the striker misses the 1v1. Like these guys get paid millions, they're playing professional, and they make mistakes. Like
Yeah.
thing happens, you know, and
Of
you
course.
are just playing. You're playing under 14 or something like that, and now you are mad the whole way because you made a mistake.
Yeah.
So
No.
I really agree with that one, Chris.
Yeah.
Which
That's a
will be
great
a
point.
second one then? Which will be a second one?
Number two is prioritize your athletic development, especially at a young age. And the reason why I say this is the athletic foundation is going to make all of the specific stuff so much easier for you to understand and then to implement when you get older. You're going to have such a large toolbox that when the goalkeeper coach gets you, he can do whatever he wants. There is nothing that you won't be able to do at an above average rate. And if you don't prioritize that early, it's really hard to get athletic later in life. And the guys that this is doesn't just apply to goalkeepers in general, to any elite athlete. The ones who trained athletically at a young age, organized or unorganized, are usually the ones that do the best long term because they have such a robust toolbox. They've got so many tools they can use because they've done so many different things
They have done everything. Yeah.
that when they go specific and they find themselves in a situation where it's like, oh, I did not train for that, but I've done something like that before when I was younger,
Mm-hmm.
when I was this.
Chris, whenever you mention young age, you mean like what? Under 8 or under 12 or?
For a kid, I would just say keep them active, like have fun, play games. That will take care of itself.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say as far as like really honing in on athletic stuff, as of 12 years old, don't get too organized. The older you get, things get more structured, but there's still a little bit of kind of flexibility there always. But I
Mm-hmm.
would say at the age of 12, like start like doing some sprint work. Like look into track and field. I think it's if goalkeepers had to choose a second sport, track and field.
Mm-hmm.
The sprinting events, the jumping events, throwing events, 100%. It's a sport literally dedicated for outputs. Run as fast as you
Mm-hmm.
can, jump as high as you can, jump as far as you can, throw as far as you can. Like those are all great things, but
Yeah.
definitely like become the best athlete you can be first, and then get specific with your sport because your sport's going to get so much easier.
That's a good one. Yeah, definitely, Chris. And then the last one will be.
Make sure your motivations are in check. Like do it for the right reasons. A lot of times people are out to just prove other people wrong. I'm like, you're wasting your time. These people don't care about you.
Yeah.
All they cared about you enough to just say how much they didn't like you or they
Mm-hmm.
wanted to see you fail. If your motivation is the haters, you're always going to have haters. Your motivation should be because you love the game, because there are a lot of good things that come from the game, and it hopefully makes you a better person. It makes you a better teammate. All these things, those are the motivational or the reasons that I think will allow you not only to go far in your career, but also to get through those difficult times. Because if all you're doing is being motivated by the people that are always looking down on you, you're just going to be looking for people to say negative things to you as a way to fuel your performance. I think that's backwards. Is if anything, look for people who are there to support you and say, you know what, I believe in you. Will you make it? I don't know. It's a really small percentage of guys who make it far, but you'll appreciate every moment of the process. You'll learn from it,
Mm-hmm.
and you'll realize that at the end of the day, you did it for the right reasons, and you can walk away at peace saying, you know what, I
Yeah.
love the sport. I learned a lot from it. It's going to make me a better person, and I don't regret any of the time spent uh, trying to reach the highest level possible in this sport. But if you're doing it for the wrong reasons, I'm telling you, you're not going to make it very far, and you're going to be a
You won't
very
enjoy it.
angry, miserable person.
Yeah, you won't enjoy it at all. That's true.
Yeah,
That's good. All right, Chris, I really appreciate this conversation. Hoping on the future we can reconnect, talk again, and then just go through other more questions that I had for you. I know you need to leave, so I want to be mindful about that. So I really appreciate you having you. And if you need anything from me, just let me know, and I'll be more than happy to help you with whatever.
I appreciate it, Coach. It was nice talking to
Awesome.
you, and I look forward to this ongoing relationship, both with you and the goalkeeper community, and hopefully, we can do something together and continue to move the goalkeeper world forward.
That's the goal. That's the goal. Make the goalkeeper union great again.
Yes, sir, man. That's it. Hey, let's go. We got some messes to clean up.
Awesome. Thank you, Chris.
My pleasure, Coach.